Hey, what's up everybody, Radix here, the one from 72, the ultra neutral, and this is the video I was telling you about with Whitley. I'm going to keep my introduction really short because Art Bell is going to talk about his stuff. And by the way, if you haven't watched Art Bell's shows, he has like the best shows. Coast to Coast is garbage. I call it crap to crap because, the C to C. But Art Bell shows are really good, and there's some channels out there with just the Art Bell shows, and I suggest you should probably go listen to them because Art usually is very critical with his guests. He just doesn't, go along with them like Nori does on Coast to Coast. He actually tries to hold their feet to the fire at a lot of times, especially if they're slipping, and he'll catch them. So that was one of the good things that I loved about the Art Bell show. But anyhow, as far as Whitley's story with the Greys, I believe most of the stuff that he's talking about. The only thing that I couldn't get on board with and didn't realize was like, that's kind of weird. It was when he was talking about the film crew at some house with some woman that got punched in the arm by a Grey and that they weren't able to catch the Grey on camera. So I was just like, that was the only thing pretty much in all of Whitley's stories that I didn't really buy into. I am going to say this, he could be lying about every single thing that he's saying, but from my experiences and the things that I know and the things that I've showed evidence on, it just seems like most of the stuff that he's talking about is true. And there's also another guy, I'm going to post his video up next, later on tomorrow, and that's Jim Sparks. And their stories are very, very similar when they talk about the Greys, even like how the Greys move, their movements and stuff like that. And Jim Sparks and also Whitley are both kind of on the same position when it comes to religion with the Greys and religion. So that is also something else. I was like, well, that's kind of, very similar. And I also don't agree with him saying that the Greys aren't much more advanced than humans. Obviously, they are far more advanced than humans, for sure. There's just no doubt about it. But I guess, a lot of people like to say things like that because it makes them feel comfortable, makes them feel like they still have control, when really you don't when it comes to the Greys right now, because they're able to just pluck people up at any time they want when you're sleeping. About 9 minutes into this video, into this interview with Whitley, he pretty much lays out like the whole thing with us getting diseases from the alien species and the alien species getting diseases from us. So it's pretty much like what I've been talking about with the COVID scenario and all that and stuff. And he just tells you right then and there in this video, like 9 minutes into it. And by the way, this video came out long before 2020, so it's an older video. And the one thing that I thought that when I was listening to his story, when he was talking about how, some of these beings actually phase into our realm, onto our planet or wherever you're at, they actually bring some of their environment with them, that they're bringing, that they're bringing the realm with them. And so I explained that with what happened to me when I was in my karate school, and you see the dirty footprints. So it seems very similar to what he's saying there about them bringing their realm with them. Like there's like some type of a bubble or something that goes with them, or something that actually, when they use certain stargates or certain portals, that they actually pull that stuff with them, their own environment. I removed a lot of the callers in this video because towards the end of the interview, Art Bell likes to let, his guests talk to the callers, so he lets people call in. And a lot of those callers, they're calling in with just a bunch of nutty ass stories that I'm just like, no. And a couple of them were like, because look, this guy, Whitley, it was very successful with a book and all this and stuff. And like some of those people are like trying to jockey for like his next book. Like they're trying to, connect with him and so, they want to get themselves into his book. And that's one of the reasons why I find very skeptical when people are writing books and stuff anyhow. Because it's always like there's an agenda to turn a buck off of a story. So the more elaborate your story is, the more value you're going to get, the more valuable your book and your story is going to be, so you can sell more books. So that's the one thing I stay away from when there's like people who talk about their stories and stuff. But however, with Whitley, he says a lot of times like he doesn't know, right? Like there's a few times that Art Bell will ask him stuff, as he's getting deeper and deeper into some of the stuff that Whitley is talking about. And Whitley literally will stop and say, hey, I don't know. He's like, I just don't know. I don't know if this is the reason or if that's the reason why they did this or how this happened. But he just tells you, what led up to it and where, he's at in his story, what things he's talking about. But he doesn't claim to know everything. In other words, he's not trying to fill in the blanks for, a shoddy ass story he's just making up. And the last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of funny, you guys might not want to hear this, but, look, he says the same thing that happened to him, that happened to Jim Sparks, is that the Greys will make you think that you're actually having sex with a beautiful woman so that way they can extract your semen and get your semen. And I'm just here to say right now that if the Greys don't have to hold everybody down for that. There are some freaks out there, maybe like myself, maybe I might volunteer and say, hey, if you want to put me in some kind of crazy ass induced state where I'm constantly seeing beautiful women and you need sperm, whatever, go for it. There's people out there probably that don't care. So I don't know why the Greys haven't figured out to just go and look up a couple of freaks who actually would be down for it. Some of the freaks may even just do it without ever having to. I know this kind of sounds crazy, but some freaks that we know on this planet, they may just do it just for the hell of it, just in front of the Greys, just so they can get get some kind of cheap, weird thrill out of it. So that's the only thing. I mean, I know that it's probably happening and it's probably true, but it's just the fact that it's why haven't the Greys figured out that there are really freaks on this planet that will just be like, yeah, whatever, you don't even got to put me to sleep for that. I'll just go ahead and give you a couple of gallons of that stuff there, some of that good old galactic gold that you can spread around the galaxy. So that's the only thing. But other than that, guys, I really liked his interview. You should check him out. His name's Whitley. You see the name up there. He's got a book. I haven't read the book, but yeah, I think it's worth listening to stuff that he has to say. And some of the things that he talks about, the reason why they don't use disclosure, is a very good. He has a very good stance on that. So you should. I would pay really close attention to Whitley's story. It's a very credible story. And with that, enjoy the rest of the time you guys have left and enjoy the video.
I am broadcasting on all AM frequencies. I will be at the South Street Seaport every day at midday when the sun is highest in the sky. If you are out there, if anyone is out there, I can provide food, I can provide shelter, I can provide security. If there's anybody out there, anybody, please, you are not alone. Whitley, of course, is a very, very good friend of mine, an author of many best-selling novels and works of non-fiction. 4 movies now have been made from his books, most recently the 2004 mega hit The Day After Tomorrow, based on his novel Superstorm, written by, well, of course, Whitley and myself. Among his best-selling novels are The Wolfen, The Hunger, which was made into a film. He's also written other bestsellers, including Billy, Cat Magic, Majestic, War Day, my personal favorite, Nature's End, Communion, Transformation. His most recent book, The Greys, is a thriller about what happens when aliens land. And I've got to tell you all, I've talked to a whole lot of people now who said, well, they went to the bookstore and they picked up The Greys, and they got through about 3 or 4 chapters and then just bought it and went home. It's being made into a film by Sony Pictures. In 1999, he co-produced with Mark Wolper a special for NBC based on his book, Confirmation. Communion, perhaps? Or Confirmation? I think Communion. At present, he and Mark are producing a remake of Wolfen for A&E. He has an internet radio program, Dreamland, of course, and his website, unknowncountry.com, is indeed the most popular edge science website in the world. Whitley Strieber in a moment right here. Welcome to the program, Whitley.
Hi, Art. I'm so delighted to be back with you and to hear your voice. I have tried to call you a few times out there in the Philippines, but it hasn't been successful. So,
if you send me an email, I will send you the appropriate number to reach me.
Okay, wonderful. I'll do that.
All right. Let me straighten this out. The NBC special, was that based on Confirmation or Communion?
Confirmation.
Okay, good.
It was based on the book Confirmation. It was about evidence, hard evidence of UFOs and implants and things like that.
All right. All right, I've got something I want to read you that somebody sent ahead of your appearance tonight. And here it is. One thing that sticks in my mind for Whitley, according to some people that have had contact with them, the Greys supposedly have claimed that they are our progenitors or creators, and that they think that they have the right to experiment with us and do with us as they will. I wonder about this, and I doubt it. For one thing, the Greys are reportedly been known to have lied on numerous occasions, so why would the Greys not be capable of lying about them supposedly being our creators or our progenitors? Didn't Whitley Strieber say that when he sent some telepathic messages to the Greys telling them they have no right to tinker and experiment with him or us humans, that the response Whitley got back was, yes, we do?
Well, I don't recall it being a telepathic message. I think I yelled it, and I think it was on the first night I had close encounter experiences in December of 1985. I recall saying something like, you'll ruin a beautiful mind and you don't have any right to do this, and things like that. And I do recall being told that they, in their opinion, they did have a right. Mm-hmm. We do have a right, as I recall I was told.
Okay, do you recall if the message that came with that was that we have the right because, in effect, we created you?
Well, the lady who's on the cover of Communion at another incident said to me, I created you. And whether she meant all of us or just me personally, I don't know. But as you know, I always say that, we have to take this whole thing with a grain of salt. I'm not so sure I'm ready to believe anything I'm told without proof by anybody. I mean, much less the Greys. And they are whatever they are and wherever they are from. And I would be the first person to say that I don't know the answers to either of those questions. They are here, though. That I do know, and I would...
Okay, that was going to be my question, Whitley. Do we have to take the fact of the Greys with a grain of salt, or is there absolutely no question in your mind?
We have to take I think there's no question in my mind that there is somebody here, probably more than one. Certainly I know of three that I have personally seen in two cases, touched, felt, held, and appeared to be real physically. Talked to in one case. Now, the question of what they are, though, is a huge question. I think we, with all of the UFO evidence and all of the physical evidence that's out there, and now even Buzz Aldrin said on a British TV documentary that he and the other astronauts aboard Apollo 11 had seen something they couldn't identify and even looked at it through a telescope.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about that. Do you have it straight in your mind that he really, in fact, did say that, or did he back away from the statement? Or?
Well, he may back away from it. That's his business. But he said it exactly like that, and it's on videotape. It's available on Google Video, in fact. And exactly the words he said. And he has to, if he doesn't want to stand behind his words, that's his business. But that is, in fact, what he said. He can back away from it all he wants to. It's something I had heard rumors of for years, but I never spoke up because I'm not going to second-guess anybody. If somebody says something, it's a different thing. He said they saw something unknown. He said they did not report it to Mission Control because of the fact that they were afraid they would be asked to turn around. I believe his name was David Baker, if I'm not correct, who was the Apollo 11 spokesman for Apollo 11, said that NASA had asked them not to speak, and all of the astronauts, not to speak about UFOs that they had seen because of fear of NASA being ridiculed. And this is in that documentary. He was on Coast to Coast just shortly thereafter, and George asked him a direct question about this, and he came back with reminding us of the fact that he had sued
Right.
Charles Berlitz for saying he saw little green men. And, I'm only repeating what the man said in the documentary. If he wishes to say that that is not what he meant, then that's his privilege. My point being that there is a load of UFO evidence out there at this point. I mean, you were just talking in the first hour about some of the NASA video, and we speak of confirmation. We had some of that video on confirmation. We had a representative of NASA look at that video. It's even more convincing than the one that you were referring to that's up on Coast Tonight. Incredible video.
I know. It's absolutely
mission.
amazing. I've seen many.
I don't see any evidence of UFOs here.
I've seen many, Whitley, but I'll tell you, the one we've got up there right now, as you point out, it's not necessarily the best one, but as I said, I'll be a monkey's uncle if that's all space debris. There's no way in hell.
It isn't. Of course not. Of course not. And then you add to that all of the video, but you add to that, in addition to all of the UFO video, then you have to ask yourself the question, okay, if they're flying around here, would they not be on the ground also? And so turn it around. Say we have the ability to go among the stars and to go to other planets, other solar systems. And we find an intelligent species who's not quite as advanced as us. I don't buy the idea that the Greys are light years ahead of us by any means. We'll get into that over the course of the show. Why not? But we find somebody. Here's what's going to happen. Our scientists are going to say, be careful. Don't get diseases from them. Don't give them diseases. So handle them carefully. They're also going to say, do not interrupt their culture or their politics. Do not let them know you're here because we want to study their culture. Then they are going to say, as time goes on, we're going to want to study their DNA. We're going to want to study their bodies, their physical characteristics. We're going to want to learn everything we can about them. And we will be doing to those people exactly what's being done to us today.
I suppose if we had the chance, we would certainly do that. Whitley, is there any possibility that that the Greys have not come across hundreds or thousands of light years to reach us, but that in fact they have simply crossed a dimensional barrier?
I think there's substantial evidence of that. I think that some of the things that happen, and that I can describe happening in my own experience, strongly suggest that. That if they do come from another planet, then there is something about the way they come here that makes them appear here in a slightly different physical form, or a slightly different form than we would call a normal physical form. Or maybe they are stepping through from another dimension, in which case then we have to ask ourselves, would there be, if they can't get through easily, could there be some tripwire, something that we might do inadvertently, that they might be trying to get us to do, that would enable them to come pouring through? I wrote a short story years ago called The Open Doors. When I heard a rumor about a paper that had been written by a very extraordinary scientist called John von Neumann, who died in the mid-50s, who was a great physicist and one of the first commentators on the so-called quantum perception problem. And I've never seen this paper. Supposedly exists. It's about 4 pages long. It's classified. I don't know if it exists, but in it, allegedly, he was of the opinion that there could be a tripwire. In other words, that if the government admitted that these creatures were real, it might create in enough minds the assumption that they were real to enable them to walk through into our dimension willingly.
Well, isn't it reasonable, based on what a lot of theoretical physicists, the best minds in our country, have to say about other dimensions? Isn't it reasonable, Whitley, to assume that if they are coming from another dimension, that the physics of that other dimension might make them every bit as alien to us as if they had come from 10,000 light years away?
Maybe more alien. Maybe much more alien, because we don't know. They're beginning to speak in terms of Sir Martin Rees recently, the astronomer royal, who's a very cool guy, incidentally, and has been on Dreamland and probably would love to be on Coast, stated that brain worlds must be physical. In other words, that they must really physically exist. I'm paraphrasing him to the nth degree. I think this is what he said. In any case, if they are physically real, then it could be that their laws of physics in those worlds are very different from the laws of physics here, which might explain that these creatures bring with them their own physics and their own reality, and that's why they are so strange in the way they function here. I mean, I had them in my life for 11 years, Art. The last book I really wrote about my personal experiences was 9 or 10 years ago, Breakthrough. And then I kind of quit doing that because, there's no point in it. I couldn't prove it. And it also became so deeply personal and so profoundly strange that I didn't actually know how to do it. So, but the possibility that they were functioning with completely different laws of physics than I was really very present in my mind.
Exactly, Whitley. In other words, if somebody had come from 1,000 light years away, they would still be of this universe, likely with most of the same laws of physics applying to them. But somebody coming from, or something coming from another dimensional reality would bring with them physics that really would mystify us and would be very different than that which we experience in these limited dimensions we have.
That's right, and maybe their dimensions are just as limited but different, and maybe they are struggling to cross through into our dimension. I think that it might have been, again, Martin Rees, who said on my program, it was another physicist, I'm not sure, but one of them said a very interesting thing. He said the way we understand these brain worlds now, these membrane, they call them brain because it's a contraction of membrane, that there is a kind of membrane between these universes, and this membrane, that it is infinitely thin. In other words, it is virtually non-existent, but it would take, as we understand it, more energy than exists in the universe, in our whole universe, to cross it. Mm-hmm. And so if they figured out a way to cross it, that's awesome.
With physics that we now understand, it would take that kind of energy. Yeah, that's right. But perhaps they have come to some understanding of how to cross it briefly for some periods of time, or maybe they're getting better at it all the time, and maybe that's why we're experiencing more. I don't know. But I wonder myself, Whitley, if, as you point out, the government would finally announce something, if it has anything to do with collective consciousness or the focusing of energy on a certain thought that would open that door, that might do the trick, huh?
Well, I think that I would not be an advocate of that. I don't think that opening this door indiscriminately is the way to go.
Oh, I'm with you there.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is to entertain this thing, to enable people to chew on it in a state of safety. In other words, nothing I do, I would assume, is going to open that door. Otherwise, that wouldn't be something I would be doing. But what I do think is if we're going to ever understand this, what we need to do is what we're doing tonight, is dialogue about it. First of all, on a personal experiential level, I've had experiences, millions of other people have had experiences, and then later, as the scientific community becomes more and more comfortable with it, then bringing that dialogue and all of the information that these people have in their lives into science via methodologies, rigorous methodologies of behavioral research that will enable us to see patterns of behaviors and patterns of activities described that will begin to be able to let us kind of forensically analyze what's being done to people on a large scale, so that step by step we understand more and more without ever tripping that wire. In other words,
I'm not at all sure we really want to trip that wire.
I don't think so. If there's a possibility of opening a door that we can't close, then we need to do this in such a way that we don't do that, and that is exactly what I'm about.
On balance,
I want to understand it without having it come at us out of a door we can't close.
With everything that you know about the Greys, Whitley, would you err on the side of caution, saying that they may not at all be our friends and have our best interests in heart, or do you think they're the warm fuzzies that a lot of people believe they are?
I think they're very complicated. I think they're like us. Is mankind good or bad? It's a hard question to answer, Art, when you look at the human species and the human history and what we do to each other every day, and what we do to the animals and to our world. It's a very hard question to answer. But you look into the face of a little child, and it's an extremely easy question to answer. So, in other words, we are a mixed bag, and they, in my personal experience, are a mixed bag too. And I think that if we are looking here at a civilization of some sort, whether it is in another dimension, or it is from another world, or there's a sort of combination of these two things involved, it is very big and very complex, and we see different parts of it at different times.
All right. Bearing in mind that we have a lot of new listeners tonight, we always do. People out there on the highways and doing who knows what at this hour of whatever it is where they are. A lot of them don't know about the Greys. If you were to give somebody a 101 on Greys, what they look like, what you know of them, their intent, all the rest of it, sort of a little 101, what would you say?
Well, what I would say is that this image of the Greys, it is a creature with big black eyes, a large head, and a thin body, ranging from something that is very ephemeral and small and seems to float rather than walk, to creatures that walk and have a sort of a stride to them, kind of a dancing almost walk, that are 3.5 or 4 or even 5 feet tall. That's what they look like. What they feel like, well, to touch them, first of all, you can get a big allergic reaction from doing this. And I've experienced that and seen it happen to others. The other, and there is a limited ability on their part to control that. The other thing is that I've had one of them once jumped on my back, and as thin and ephemeral as it appeared, its legs against my hips and its arms, pinning my arms to my sides, were like iron.
Wow.
It was like iron. It was like I couldn't get it off in any way or move my arms in any way, whatever.
Do you think that was all of a physical nature, Whitley, a true physical nature, or do you think that in some way you were mentally disabled, as it were?
All right, you're deep into this. That's a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. it felt physical. It felt very physical.
Sure.
But whether or not that's entirely true, I don't know. I'll give you an example of why it may not be true. And this is typical. This just happened. It happened to a carpenter I knew. And I'm telling you now a specific story, folks, that is multiplied probably 100,000 times over the letters we got of the kind of things that the Grays are able to do. He had finished out a house up the road from us. This was before my close encounter experience, and he didn't tell me about this until afterwards. So anyway, he'd finished out this house, and he had still all of his tools in it, and he decided to stay in the house overnight because the locks weren't on the doors yet, and he didn't want to leave all those expensive tools in this house. So he slept on the floor in the living room of the house, and in the middle of the night, he was awakened by a noise, and he saw what he thought of as a little man standing across the living room from him. And he was, as he put it, scared, brainless.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I absolutely agree. I'm sure I would have been too. And he fumbled to turn on his flashlight. And he got the flashlight turned on, and he could see that it was like a big bug, as he put it, a big insect. And he tried to shine the flashlight on it, whereupon it completely transformed into a bird of paradise, a big, beautiful, one of those big tropical birds.
Yeah.
And at that point, he dropped the flashlight and nearly knocked himself out trying to run out the front door, as I recall him telling me, because apparently the door opened in and he tried to push it out, etc. And the thing disappeared. Then, as I recall, he told me he went home, leaving his tools behind, and decided he'd pick them up the next morning anyway. Understandably.
Oh yeah, that's incredible.
Now, that's just one of many cases. I'll give you another case. Man and his wife, very complex group experience that happened in our cabin. We had 17 people at the house at this time, and a Gray had come in the window into one of the bedrooms and punched the lady who was sleeping in that bedroom, Raven Dana, in the shoulder. And she woke up and immediately had all of the things happen that happen to people. She thought it was a raccoon at first, then realized how could a raccoon get in through a closed screen window like that. Then she realized it was one of the Grays. And she reached her hand out, and it reached its hand out and touched her hand. And she had a mental impression of it saying, "What would you want me to do?" And she said aloud, "You could go down that hallway," because we had a low-light camera on in the hallway because the film crew was there. So it left the room. It went into the next room. The two women in that room went past through the camera, by the way. We never found a single image of it on the camera, frustratingly enough, on the film, on the video. Woke up the two women in the next room. Then disappeared. The next thing that happened was the head of the film crew and his wife were sleeping on the roll-out couch in the living room, the convertible couch in the living room. He saw this big-headed little man standing beside their bed and reached to turn on the light, whereupon it turned from a big-headed little man into something with the head of a falcon and then disappeared.
Again, morphing. It sure does sound like something from another dimension as opposed to another...
Morphing like that, exactly, and then disappeared. Then he woke his wife up, and they talked about it for a while, not knowing that the people in the other bedrooms were all talking about what had happened to them. Raven Dana wasn't talking to anybody because she was alone. The other two women were talking about what happened to them. The people in the basement had an experience with a big ball of light that had come into the basement at the same time, and they were talking about that. Anne was sound asleep upstairs. Andrew and I were out in the woods, and it was dawn was just breaking, and so we came up to the house. At that point, we saw a translucent, hooded figure go down the deck, across the backyard, and go racing off through the woods. And this is important, moving between the trees, not through the tree trunks.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, the man and woman in the bed in the convertible couch leapt out of the bed because they thought it was on fire. They had experienced a terrific burst of heat, as whatever it was, the thing that had disappeared had still been there, but invisible. And then
so, in other words, everybody was experiencing or feeling something almost completely different, some sort of something that was different. Yeah.
But related to their perceptions at that moment. In other words, this
Bingo.
was not a group hallucination at
Right.
all. The people involved were not in direct contact with each other at all. Then Brave and Dana, who was the one who had touched it, and I had warned them because of my own experiences to be very careful not to touch them, because it's, by that time I was under the care of an allergist who was being very helpful to me, and I was able to be touched by the Greys, like being jumped on without having an allergic reaction. But that was because he had done an elaborate allergic analysis of me and was treating me for the underlying allergies. And they were the very allergies that the Greys had identified that I needed to be treated for. So if the histamine response to them wouldn't overwhelm me.
The real Grey goo. Listen, Gary in San Antonio, Texas, going back to the subject of carpenters for a moment, says, ask Whitley, please, if in his interaction with the Greys, what they say on the matter of, is there a God? Did they create Jesus Christ and send him as a teacher?
Somehow I don't think that's part of their thing. I have never had the impression. I've had the impression that my religious feelings and my closeness to Christ are my own business. I've never felt that they participated in that, and I never felt they were particularly against it either. In other words, that just wasn't an issue in my experience. I know that there have been rumors that they said in that Eisenhower briefing document that they had created Christ and all of this stuff, and I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, that's the sort of thing that people would get from them, but that never really arose in my experience with them at all. Not at all. It never affected my religious beliefs in any way.
Well,
if anything,
what you just described, Whitley, everybody, that house obviously being electrified with a lot going on, but everybody having different perceptions and different experiences. My God, that surely does sound like something that would come from another dimension with different laws of physics and all the rest of it, and as opposed to coming from a different planet. But I don't know. This whole thing is so fascinating to me. And by the way, your book on the Greys is a gigantic success. I hear it's getting really, really rave reviews, and the people who have written to me privately are giving it rave reviews.
Yeah, apparently it's a success. It's doing really very well. And I think that a lot of copies are being sold, and I'm very grateful for that. The publisher is happy about it, and I know that and it's important. I think that the book it's doing. The reason people are responding to it is this: first of all, there's a tremendous freedom for me in being able to write about things that I believe are true, but that I can't prove. I did that in Majestic, and Majestic was a big success, too, for that reason, because people can look at that and they can entertain these things that in nonfiction I could not write about, but also I can get across things like the way it feels to be a family who has this in the family, as the family and the main characters, some of the main characters in this do. And that's important, and there are little points in the book where people who have had the close encounter experience are going to read these things. It's going to resonate in them, and it's going to bring parts of their memories up that they did not have access to before, because I lived through that process for years, and I learned how to do it, and I've communicated that through this book. So, and there's also a lot about the possible government programs connected with this. I've worked hard on this, and the other thing that's changed is it used to be that no one dared tell their friends. They'd buy a book like this, keep it in the bag, take it home, read it by themselves, and never tell a soul.
That's right.
People have forgotten about that because everybody knows there's something to this now. That 80% or something of the population believes the government is holding back about the UFO things, which of course it is, and for good reason. I mean, I can tell you the reasons if you want to know.
I do want to know. I want to know what you think they know, and also why they're holding it back.
Okay, here's the reason they're holding it back. It's quite simple. Put the president at a press conference, and the president says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have some good news, some extraordinary news, rather," he would say. We have determined that UFOs are intelligently guided. Then the first question of the press is going to be, what about the abductions? And he is going to have to either say, well, we don't believe that's true, which will last about 2 days, and then it's not going to be believed. Or he's going to have to tell the truth. And the truth is, we know they are penetrating into our lives, but we don't know why, we don't know what they're doing, and we have no way of controlling them at all. Now, I would submit no president will ever give that press conference, because it says that the fundamental promise of government, that government will protect the individual, cannot be met. That in this case, they can't do it. And they're just never going to say that. Never.
Well, I agree with you. That is their primary charge, and as you point out, they can't, or others believe, Whitley, that a deal has been struck with them, and that in return for certain technology or information, we can't know what really, these abductions are more or less allowed. Which do you believe?
I don't think there's been that kind of contact, because I don't think the Greys think like that. I think that there's a lot of believe that it's possible that over the years, one of the things that has been done by the intelligence community is to spread rumors of contacts like that against the possibility that if the Greys do show up, people will believe the government has secret knowledge and will continue to turn to the government for support rather than just completely panicking. And that these rumors have worked in waves, in the sense that whenever there's a large number of sightings or a large number of abduction reports of substantial government secret knowledge come out. In the Greys, I have a story about, one of the big sub-stories is about the struggle of people within the government who are in communication with a Grey to make that communication work usefully for us. And I think that's an accurate depiction of what's actually going on, frankly.
All right. I recall in a previous program we did, and one, frankly, that I'm never going to ever forget, Whitley, you had kind of an emotional, almost an emotional breakdown right on the program, talking about an encounter that you had with the Greys in which they took a sample from you.
Yes.
It was as if on that program that you were reliving the incident itself, as though you were feeling it, as though it were happening to you again. I mean, there was that much emotion. You recall?
Yeah, I recall very well. And it is, the emotion is still there because the experience was so intimate and so difficult for me. And it was one of many. I mean, I've had other experiences like that I don't really talk about. Not because I'm keeping secrets. I'm not about keeping secrets. I tell everything I can. But it's just too difficult for me. I had, it's hard. It was hard. It was all hard. And to wake up in a state of intense sexual excitement, which has been artificially induced in you, and to have that happen, helpless to do anything about it, and a man who has taken a vow that he respects enormously and who believes in those vows just to the bottom of my heart. Before God, I took that vow, and that vow's validity was denied me. It's not something one is going to ever forget.
A lot of what's been described, both by you and by others, with respect to the Greys, sounds very hellish, frankly.
Yeah.
But again, a dentist in the end has done a good thing for us. It's a root canal, and we've been through hell, but we sure feel better afterwards. So I guess that's really the root of the question, is whether in the end all of this is being done to help us or not in our best interest, in their best interest. In other words, they're doing some sort of genetic thievery from us, or manipulation of us. God, it's a question I want answered so much. It's obvious to me after listening to you and others that it is going on. We just want to know what it is.
Well, of course we do. And the other possibility is this. You always have to try to turn it around and look at what would we do under the circumstances. And one of the things that we would definitely be doing if we went to another world would be to be looking into their genetic structure. And that would be a quite complicated and involved process because the human genome is extremely complicated, and in order to really examine it thoroughly in all of its permutations, and if you're interested in the speed with which the species is evolving, for example, you can't do that by examining just 3 or 4 people. You need to get a whole cross spectrum of the species. You need to understand the way the human genome is deteriorating and changing, in other words, the kind of genetic diseases and so forth we have, and how those might have evolved over time. You need a whole other spectrum of the population. So the result is that you'd be at that for a long time. And if you wanted to do it in secret, with and there is a good side to this, with a minimal amount of bruising to the culture and to the individuals involved, you would definitely do something to put them to sleep while you did your work. You would make every effort to prevent them from realizing what had happened.
Right.
And so that their culture would remain intact. You know, there was an interesting article written a long time ago now, and my goodness, in 1977 in Science magazine by D.B.H. Kuiper and Michael Morris, 2 physicists. The Kuiper who discovered the Kuiper belt, a very famous guy, actually, and speculating just very briefly on what would happen if aliens came here, and they concluded that they would be very secretive. They would not show themselves. And the reason they came up with was an interesting one. They said that the only thing they could possibly want from us, if they were so technologically advanced that they could cross space — this was before the idea of interdimensional travel or there being other coherent, structured universes in addition to our own in the same space — was present in physics. So they were assuming definitely from another planet.
Right.
If you came, the one thing you would want from us, from the people in this planet, would be to know how they were doing things differently. In other words, innovation. And in order to understand that, you would have to keep yourself very well hidden. Very well hidden. So
I can buy all of that, Whitley. Of course, you would keep yourself well hidden. It's just that this is some kind of puzzle, and I'm trying to figure out if it's in our best interest, whether they have our best interest in mind, or whether they're just trying to learn about us, or whether they're manipulating us. And boy, is that a big and important question. If they're just,
I think Art, that it's the most important question in the world, and addressing this question in a useful way is what my whole life is about. Because when I realized that they were real, even though they were sort of on the cultural periphery, and I was right at the center of things with books like War Day and Nature's End, I was really getting into this world politically and culturally. I would be a factor in the mainstream right now if it hadn't been for this. But at the same time, I was coming into contact with these remarkable beings with all kinds of abilities and effects on my life and on the lives of others that were completely unexpected to me. And I was seeing that they were making an effort to hide, and I thought to myself, this is the most important thing in the world. This transcends everything. There are two things. One, the ability of this species to survive over time, and that means environmental issues. And two, these people and what they are doing here and why. And that, therefore, I decided I will devote my life to these two things because this is the most important stuff I know. And I have done that. And I am working, and this book is I think I'm excited by the response to it because I think that means it's working. It's doing what it's intended to do, which is to help people remember and to focus their memories so that they begin to understand what, in their terms, what happened to them actually was and what it meant. And for people who haven't had the experience to get a taste of what it's like. And
Whitley, with the current state of our environment, which is really pathetic, and countries like Iran and North Korea clamoring to get their hands on a nuclear weapon, and probably well on the way toward it, if not already possessing it, something awful is bound to happen. A lot of people wonder, and I wonder, if something awful does happen, would there be an intervention, or could there be an intervention? Would they step in to stop self-destruction?
Well, I doubt if they would step in to stop like a war. But if the planetary environment begins to fall apart on us in a terminal way, I would not be surprised to see them come out into the open, because if it's in their interest that we continue to live, and it may be then that that overbalances the need for secrecy, and they therefore come out into the open. I think under those circumstances, they probably wouldn't be very pleasant. I think that they would be pretty annoyed about the whole thing, and we could expect them to be rather arbitrary about what they did to save the environment, because they would have lost something in revealing themselves. They would have redirected our culture toward them, because we would from then on we would be focused on them, and they would know that. And therefore, this innovation that they might have been looking for would be at an end. So they would be looking to us for other things. And let's hope that those would be things that we would want them to, that it would be useful to us to give them.
Well, as you look, just changing the subject a little bit for a second, as you look around at the state of our world right now, environmentally, particularly environmentally, I wonder how close you think we are to the beginning of a terminal stage.
Oh, we're in a terminal stage already, Art. We've been in one for a couple of years, and I'll tell you why. A couple of years ago, it was discovered that the great engine of the Gulf Stream, of the North Atlantic Oscillation, of that current, where cold water goes down from the surface in the Northern Ocean and underneath, and the circulation keeps the world's ocean currents going was failing. That there had been 12 great columns of water there, and now there were only 2.
Mm-hmm.
And when those stop, then over a period of months or years, the whole flow of the Gulf Stream will stop too, radically destabilizing the climate. And in addition to that, there's another problem that's come up, and that is that the Caribbean has apparently grown too warm to sustain the monsoon that goes over the Amazon every year. And the Amazon has now been dry for 3 years. And
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Terrible drought in the Amazon. And incidentally, one of the things that we need to do, the Coast community needs to do, and the UnknownCountry.com community needs to do, is we need to collectively do our thing in order to try to get that monsoon moving again. Because if it doesn't, and that forest dies,
Mm-hmm.
then life on this planet is going to change, and there will be fewer human beings as a result in significant quantities over time. We will see a dieback of this species because of the drastic climate changes that this will cause. The Amazon is the heart of the environment. If it has a heart attack, we're going to suffer serious problems.
Well, it certainly feels now as though, as you point out, we're, at some beginning stage of the terminal point in all of this, and there's a kind of a tipping, and I can feel it's already beginning, and it just scares the hell out of me, Whitley. It just really does scare me.
Well, especially because it's, we're distracted by all these crazy wars that don't really seem to make much sense, but wars really never do, and we're not thinking about this problem. And the horrible irony is, Art, as you and I both know from the work we did, it's not even a difficult problem to solve. The idea that it's an insoluble problem, we can't do anything about it, is a complete illusion. It's a fabrication. It's so sad.
Well, I don't know, Whitley. This may be one area, I think we've talked about this before, where you and I disagree. I'm more of a pessimist than you are, but nevertheless, if you really think it's soluble with any means that we know and understand now, just lay it out for me, because I really would like to understand how this could be turned around. Everybody would.
Sure. If you go on my website and you click on the Quick Watch and you go down to the bottom of the page that explains I think it probably needs to be updated, that page, and I think it's still in 2005 or early 2006. But down at the bottom there is an evolution of something called the Canadian Prime Minister's Challenge, which is a method of doing simple things around the home that will radically and dramatically reduce your carbon dioxide emissions. And if people did just a few of these things around their homes in large numbers, this problem would end. If we had had the leadership, the presidential leadership, 5 years ago or 8 years ago to do this, if Clinton or Bush, and remember Clinton was as indifferent about this as Bush is, the only difference was that he acknowledged that it was real, and Clinton and Bush pretends it's not. That's the only difference. Neither of them did anything much.
Yeah.
And but if you had a president who was willing to say, "Hey, folks, let's change a few light bulbs. Let's make a program to get more efficient refrigerators. Let's raise the temperature a little bit in the summer and lower it a little bit in the winter," you would be saving millions upon millions of tons of carbon dioxide emissions every year. And if they did that over the whole Western world, it would make a significant difference. And
perhaps it would, but I'll tell you, Whitley.
Countries like India or China are getting well organized enough to where they could do it too, or the Philippines, for that matter. I mean, you have a system there where if you take your car out on Mondays, you're going to get fined.
That's right.
And it used to be that no one cared in the Philippines. But the country's it's advancing, it's becoming more organized, and as it does, they can become more responsive to these environmental needs.
Yeah, but Whitley, there's one other aspect. The whole eastern part of the world part that I live in right now, is beginning to go industrially nuts. In other words, the people here want everything that we have in the United States. The people in China want everything. 2 cars in the garage, the whole business. And by God, they're going to have it, and they're well on the way toward having it. And when they get it, I just don't know that the world. I'm a pessimist. I don't think the world can sustain the kind of environmental hit it's going to take when this part of the world that I'm in right now begins to become as industrialized as we were.
No, it can't, and therefore, it isn't going to be like that. Something else will happen. Because I'll tell you this species, there's a death wish among human beings, and it's expressed whenever you hear someone saying global warming isn't real, or saying that I look forward to the end of the world because I believe in the rapture and I'm going to go raptured up to heaven.
Yes.
All of that. That's the death wish speaking. When you hear a Muslim fundamentalist saying that he's eager for the end of the world so that that imam will come up out of the well that he's supposed to be falling into, that all of those things, that's the death wish speaking. But the death wish is tiny compared to the life force, because the life force has to do with people falling in love with each other, with children being born, with all of that urgency that you just talked about to have a better life. But we're not going to go, the people who want a better life are not going to go all the way, I don't think, all the way down the road to destruction in order to get it. There will come a point when they will realize that if they are going to have a better life, they're going to have to acknowledge the limitations that the environment puts on them. And you know what? They'll figure out how to respect the planet's needs and also have a better life.
Whitley said something earlier in the show that I want to get back on right now. He said there's some evidence that the Greys are not light years ahead of us. Now, that's very interesting, because obviously if they were light years ahead of us, they would have a technology that would, A, solve our global warming problem, and B, provide us with enough energy to continue without using fossil fuels and change everything straight up, and they could do that right now. So, Whitley, what makes you think they are not light years ahead of us?
Well, one thing is very clear: they either can't or don't intend or won't solve our problems for us. That is quite clear. Now, with regard to their not being that far ahead of us, one of the problems with technology gaps is that they look larger than they actually are. And the classic example, of course, is the Aztecs, assuming that the Spaniards were gods, because they'd never seen horses before, they didn't have the wheel, and they happened to arrive at the same time that Quetzalcoatl was expected to return. And so there was and they had cannons and could kill people from a distance. So the whole culture was essentially frozen by what were actually technologies that were only slightly in advance of what the Aztecs themselves had.
Mm-hmm.
They just looked awesome. And if you go back to your own life, say in 1975, what would a laptop, a computer have been to you then?
Magic.
Or magic, or the internet, magic.
Mm-hmm.
Magic. And but it goes even deeper than that. But if you look at our own technological advances, when I first wrote Communion, I was just excoriated and laughed at, because, and the main reason was they were saying that everyone was scientists were all saying it's such, outer space is so vast, no one could get here. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But now they're saying not only could they get here, there's a whole lot of different ways they could do it. They could be
That's right.
from a brain world. They could be from another dimension,
That's right.
a parallel universe. And we are also realizing that there are ways of crossing interstellar space that are outside of space-time. They could even, we haven't discussed this yet tonight, be time travelers. And all of these things are now possible. In other words, they could be coming at us from different directions, conceivably even more than one different direction, which is extraordinary. Now, look at just one technology. They have the ability to use invisibility awesomely. They are really very capable of using invisibility.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back now to that night when the little being, he's beside the filmmaker, he turns, his head turns into the head of a falcon, then he disappears. Then he leaves. Andrew and I see him moving down the deck, translucent, in other words, partly visible.
Mm-hmm.
The people inside have experienced a burst of heat. The reason is that he has been doing something to bend light. That's why he disappeared. But whatever he was doing caused heat, because it takes energy to bend light.
Mm-hmm.
And he held that heat technologically in his immediate proximity so that they would not feel it and be aware of his presence. Then when he realized we were coming closer, and he was caught between them and us, and with me especially, being so sensitized to them, I might have very well have detected his presence in one way or another in the room. He decided to take off. He then released part of his invisibility, therefore a burst of heat. And when we saw him, he was still partly invisible and partly visible, in other words, translucent. What we're looking at there, Art, is the function of technology. We are in the process right now of understanding invisibility. We will be building and creating devices that enable invisibility very soon, but with the difference that our solution is much more elegant than that and will not require the presence of something that bends light and that therefore has to do with gravity. It works differently. One of the things that the visitors do have is the ability to manipulate gravity.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we're far away from. And it's another thing that suggests to me that they may be from another reality, as well as maybe another planet. Maybe the two things are the same. I don't know. Because the manipulation of gravity seems right now very far from possible to us. But the visitors do it easily. When they used to arrive at the cabin, you would hear them in a little ship come right across the roof, and you would hear things like, it sounded like ball bearings clicking in it, going click, 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 and it would drop down into the little yard in front of the house. You wouldn't be able to see it, but you knew it was there because you had just heard it arrive. And I learned to be very insistent with myself. And the more determined I became to not let go of those things, the more I noticed the little things, the little giveaways of the visitors as they moved around in the yard. You could hear them, for example, even though they were invisible, you could still hear them.
Whitley, our government, obviously, if they are in communication with the visitors, they're not going to tell us about it. You know, you elegantly pointed that out earlier. They really can't.
No.
But what about somebody like yourself? I mean, you have had an uncommon amount of interaction with them. Have you attempted communications, or if you have not, do you want to attempt communications? Do you want to be the messenger? Do you want to be the person to describe to us what their motives are? Do you want to talk to them?
I'm interested in empowering us. My focus is on us. I'm interested in human beings becoming an effective part of the relationship. Right now, we are passive. non-functional in the relationship. They do what they want to us.
Yeah, exactly.
I want that to change. I want us to be active partners in the relationship. Whatever their motives may or may not be doesn't even interest me that much. What I'm interested in is, what can we get out of this? We are obviously not that far behind them technologically. We're already close to invisibility. There are scientists who are working on these incredible drives that are going to enable us to leap across space, apparently. There's all kinds of stuff like that going on at every level technologically that are catching up with the visitors quite quickly. I want us to be empowered in this. I'm interested in our side of the relationship. I'm interested in making it active, and to do that, you have to make it knowledgeable. The foundation of knowledge is going to come from the people who had the experience, the people who know them, and the people who are interested. And I hope that's a large number of people. That's why I'm out here.
Well, if we cannot do it through our government, and this may be one thing we cannot do through our government, then it's got to be through people like yourself and through others out there. So,
right.
How do you advise people? I mean, you're not the only one in contact with these visitors. There are so many others in contact. How do you advise contactees now?
Well, what I think is that people should do their best to tell their story as best they can. And the result of this is going to be that you get all kinds of remarkable stories. We had the letter mail that we got in the initial years after communion came out revealed an array of contact experiences that was so far beyond anything you could even begin to imagine, that it was awesome. And the other thing that was awesome was the extraordinary human ability to cope with this. People were coping with things happening to them and their families very, very well. Because the other thing that you learn when you're dealing with the visitors is that we are highly intelligent. We are not stupid. We're not the sort of second-rate. We just are less informed. We have less knowledge. But we are very smart, and they respect that, believe me, more than we do. And they are quite careful. They were careful, very careful with me. When I began to home in on observing the things that they did with gravity, they began to hide that from me because they thought that I might conceivably be able to describe this accurately enough, in my opinion they thought this, to scientists with whom I am in contact, that they would be able to make leaps, because I don't think they are ready for us to be on an equal footing with them when it comes to things like that. They are not. They want to be in control of the relationship. I want to at least be in control of our side of it.
Well, one of the things I've noticed, and one of the things that makes it very, very difficult for all of us to correlate this information, is that the contactees, Whitley, seem to all have different perceptions, so many different descriptions of the visitors, so many different descriptions.
Yes.
For example, somebody who is very religious will come on the line and tell me about an experience they had, and they will automatically, you'll get a line like, well, I saw this creature or this being, and I prayed to God in the name of Jesus. I said, let it be gone, and it was gone. Now, that story may not be one bit different than Whitley's encounter with a gray that ended up in some other way. I'm saying that people's perceptions, beliefs, and faith guide what they report.
Yes. And this is what we have to address this with. This is what our culture and our experience of life has given us. And it is the way we handle this, the way we come to understand how we address it, that counts. Because we cannot say that the person, for example, the man of faith who thought they were demons and prayed them away,
yes,
is wrong. We
No, we
cannot
cannot
also
say that. That's right. But
no, we can't.
but it
But I
confuses
can
everything.
find you other people. I can find you other people who believe the Greys are angels, who are also, I believe, fundamentalist Christians. So, you can get any side of any of those coins. The point being this, that empowering us in this means that we acknowledge that this is real. And we do this as a culture without the government having to say, yes, it is real, and possibly tripping that wire we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. We do everything except that, so that we get to the point where there is enough scientific study, and even if we can't get it to the point where there can be funds granted within the foundational community, because the National Science Foundation has stated that UFO research is not a fit subject for grant money, and if they change that position, then that is the government acknowledging that this is real. So they can't change that position. So what we need is for physicists and other scientists to be thinking about this, to be thinking about it, to be speculating about it, writing papers about it, as in the context of what we understand now, and gradually focusing on it more and more clearly. And we need the average individual who is having these experiences to be able to come out in public more and more openly without fear. And fortunately, that's ending. The days when some CNN reporter could laugh this off the face of the earth are going, because nowadays, when you see that on TV and some idiot is snickering about it on the local TV, people get mad and they make themselves heard.
Yeah, look at what's changed. You and I wrote Global Superstorm, Whitley, and they laughed, they snickered, but in the last years, my goodness, that certainly has changed. And now it's just about a consensus in the entire scientific community now that what we wrote about is well underway. So, all of that's changing. I mean, look, we have physicists now, theoretical physicists like Dr. Kaku, who talk about 11 or more dimensions. So the scientists may not know it, but they're moving in that direction anyway, Whitley. I mean, they cannot talk about 11 dimensions where the laws of physics may be entirely different than ours without finally getting to the possibility that those dimensions might be inhabited by creatures that are not locked into the same laws of physics that we all have to live by.
Right. Very true. Very true. And
so they are moving in that direction.
The letter mail I get from people who have experiences is much more developed and subtle, mm-hmm. and dimensionalized than it was earlier on. Earlier on, it was extremely complex and very surprising and very amazing. But now, people aren't simply reporting these extraordinary things. They have insight into what's happening to them. Mm-hmm. And that's a big, big step. A big step. We're going toward a point where we are going to be in control, at least to a degree, of our side of this relationship, and hopefully that will bring it into more focus. Because right now the visitors seem very anarchic to me, and in the sense that there are guys out there that are real creeps, and there are others that seem, pretty more mature. Let me put it that way. Some are like bandits. They'll do anything. They rape people. They don't care. They don't care about us. They don't recognize us as anything except animals. Mm-hmm. Others are extremely sensitive morally and sensitive to the human soul. And I'm just talking now about the Greys. We haven't even begun to talk about the blondes, and that's a whole nother ball of wax that I address as best I can in the book too, based on what I had extensive communications with a blonde who is portrayed as a character in the story. In fact,
okay,
hated the Greys, by the way.
All right, Whitley. Well, we're getting to the point where we're pretty close to taking phone calls, and inevitably you're going to hear from contactees and people who've had experiences with the Greys, and maybe it'll be an opportunity for you to sort of express to people who have this contact what you think it is they ought to do. I mean, do you just lay back and let it happen because you have no choice and do observation? Do you attempt to communicate? If you have one of these experiences, what is the best thing you can do?
Well, I certainly can talk about that, and there's a lot of different things you can do depending on how well you remember it and whether or not you had it alone or with a member of the family, and the degree to which you are having it. Did it happen to you once? Do you remember only one time, or does it happen to you a lot? Does it happen to your kids? Does it happen across generations? There's a whole lot of stuff you can do, and including that if you get deeply into it, it becomes possible to communicate. It is. I mean, it's definitely possible to communicate, and that's another thing that I tried to write about in this. Was one of the reasons I made it into fiction was that communication is so hard to describe. It's like riding a bicycle. It's easy to do, but hard to tell how you do it.
I have obviously dominated a lot of Whitley's time, so Whitley, if you're ready, there's about a zillion people who would like to speak with you on the lines awaiting.
Well, I'm ready.
Okay, then, here they come. Wildcard line, you are on the air with Whitley Strieber. Hello.
Well, sure, you can. It's simple to email me. You can email me at whitley@unknowncountry.com. Now let me ask you.
No, he's gone. He's gone.
Okay.
But what he said was he had a spiritual experience. So again,
yeah, well,
it's
I know
kind
exactly
of like
what he was talking about. Because many people, when they are in a close encounter situation, if they overcome their fear, as he did, he reports having done, then it changes. The whole experience changes, including the way the Greys act. It all changes. I've had that, to an extent, I've had that experience.
The very same thing, Whitley, is reported with people who have had out-of-body experiences. The ones who have close to out-of-body experiences have a tremendous amount of fear. They're frozen. They're scared to death. If they somehow can get past that initial frozen fear, they seem to have a good experience. I've never managed to make it past, except once.
I had one really cool out-of-the-body experience that got me to go to. I went to one of Bob Monroe's Gateway weekends at his foundation at that time, right after this experience, because it was a perfect split, and I moved out into the room. I was still in this level of reality. I was completely separate from my body. I could see myself and my wife there in the bed, and I moved out through the wall and the window into the front yard. It was magnificent. Just marvelous. It was
but again, you got past the fear, and that seems to be the key with any of these sorts of experiences, is to get past the fear. And boy, if you're confronted with a Grey or an alien, I just don't know how you do that, but I guess he did. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Whitley Strieber. Hi. Okay,
what about your
right.
site?
Well, I'm curious, Whitley, how in the world, when you hear stories like this, do you discern, no disrespect to the last caller, but how do you discern between people telling stories and imaginations and the real thing? I suppose since you've been there and done that, you probably can discern, can't you?
Well, I can, to be honest with you, and it's true that people who really are in the experience generally always can. But at the same time, it's not appropriate for me to say, to pass judgment on people, because maybe I'd be wrong. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I can. I wouldn't presume to do that, because the dialoguing that's necessary, part of it has to do with letting all of that stuff come out. And over time, what is real will gradually be what is left over time, just the same way as panning for gold. If you keep panning, eventually all you've got left in your pan is the gold.
Yeah, that's right. All right. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Whitley Strieber. Hello.
Have you found a lot of people that were involved with mind control and the Greys and other entities?
Well, it's a huge subject, and it's a big subject in my life. And the reason that's true is that in May of 1993, I had an object put in my left ear. I was awake when it happened. I saw the people who did it. There may have been a gray there, but there were certainly two human beings there. It happened on a May night. I woke up, and as I awoke, I heard a male voice say in the backyard, the windows were all open, it was a warm night, in the backyard say, "Condition red." I then saw a man and a woman standing in the doorway at the foot of the bed. They came quickly across the room. I then could not see anymore. I felt myself being turned on my right side and pressure being applied against my left ear, waves of pressure, and a female voice saying I don't really remember what they were, but they're sort of comforting things to me, like the effect that this was going to be a wonderful blessing and that I shouldn't be afraid and things like that.
Well, for the sake of the audience, I remember having Dr. Lear on and describing a surgeon attempting to remove that from your ear, and the surgeon said the damn thing moved. I'll never forget that, Whitley.
Right. The surgeon was on with you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And he described, and that the video is up in the subscriber section of my website to this day, where he actually sees the object move out when he touches it with his scalpel.
That's right.
But let's get back to the issue of mind control. Does this mean I'm under mind control? This was my question immediately. And if so, if I thought that was true, I think I might even consider killing myself. But personally, I do not believe that it is true, because I am working too hard on behalf of a level of freedom and independence based on knowledge about this for it to be any kind of bad mind control. So,
okay. Well, I hope that's right.
I hope I'm right. That's all I can say. I hope I'm right. Now, whether these implants involve mind control, or if mind control could be involved in this, mind control is a matter of influencing the way a person thinks from the outside by introducing material that they believe to be their own thoughts. That's what mind control is.
That's right. So how would you know? How would you know, Whitley, if it was happening?
Well, I think you would know by what you did. By what you did. And what I'm doing is trying to really empower the human species to perform our side of this relationship in a functional manner. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I don't think it's a bad thing to be doing.
No, I don't either. But the question is whether it's your original thought.
I don't think I don't think I can answer that. And if and if I said I could, maybe I would be under mind control.
First time caller line, you're on the air with Whitley Strieber. Hello. He makes a very, very good point, Whitley. There are just a lot of people out there who are just blind to all of this, including the environmental catastrophe that's hanging over our heads and getting closer every day, and the visitors and all the rest of it. They're not actively debunkers. They're not evil people. No. They just don't know.
The weight of that is what we have to bear. If those of us who are on the active side of this particular human triad, those of us who are trying to do something, are strong enough, we will succeed. And if we're not, their inertia will bring the whole species down. There's no question about that. That's really the crossroads we're at right now.
And you're more of an optimist than I am. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Whitley Strieber. Hi.
Well, what she's talking about is something I hear a lot of this physical invasion business, and it is not something that has really happened to me, and this has always been outside of my body, but a lot of people report this sense of physical invasion. I, however, have seen the Blues once or twice. The first time they were with the Greys on my first close encounter experience, and they seem to be working for them. I have numerous letters, not emails, but from before email letters about the Blues and about their presence, and they do seem to be a somewhat more benign presence than the Greys, it's true. But at the same time, this business of them working together is repeated, too, from time to time. You do see that as well. So It's a very mixed bag. I thought that what the caller talked about was fascinating, and, there's obviously so much about this experience we still have.
It is fascinating. All right, Whitley, hold tight. We're here at the bottom of the hour. But, so many different perceptions, so many that have had this experience. But, my God, so many different perceptions about what these creatures are, what these creatures want, what they did, whether it was religious or secular. I mean, just so completely different that if you didn't know better, it sounds crackpotish, doesn't it? I'm Art Bell. Hello, all. I use the term, it sounds kind of crackpotish, doesn't it? And I meant that in no derogatory sense at all. But if you listen to these people that have had these experiences, these experiencers, if you will, the people who have encountered the visitors, their perceptions are so different. Their faith is so different. The way they tell their stories is so different, and the way they perceive what happened to them is so different that, frankly, it does sound a little crazy when you listen to these various stories. It's hard to separate it, and it's damn easy to sit back and sort of listen to a program like this and go, well, what a bunch of crackpots. But this is something that's really happening. We are being visited, folks. And the fact that you're hearing different perceptions of those visitations doesn't mean it's crazy. It is happening. Whitley Strieber, who knows a lot about it, back in a moment. Once again, Whitley Strieber. Whitley, I hope you're following what I'm saying. Somebody tuning into the middle of this program, listening to these descriptions, I'm sure probably half of them are sitting back, and I know not all of them, because I'm getting a lot of very sincere responses here, but as people listen to these descriptions, because of all these different perceptions and faiths and ideas and way they greet the visitors, and their understanding of what just happened to them, there's no thread, or there's very few threads, Whitley, that go through this that make, sense to somebody listening to it.
What's happening is this. They are trying to describe, in a language that was not designed to describe, an experience that they have very little actual information about what it really is. The only thing you can say that's clear from what we're hearing is that people have had something surpassingly strange happen to them. So strange that maybe it is beyond the imagination of the average person to come up with a description like this. But whether or not what is being said and what really factually happened instant by instant of the same thing is a whole different kettle of fish. This is one of the core reasons that I wrote The Greys as fiction, so that I could help people who are having the experiences to explore what was for me a years-long process of clarifying my understanding of this in such a way that I could communicate meaningfully with the visitors a little bit. But we know there are other creatures on this planet, like dolphins, who have complicated languages, and we can teach dolphins to do things, but we can't understand a single word they say to each other. We're not even close.
That's right.
Undoubtedly, they're in the same position with us. And these visitors are even farther away. They're just light years away. But the struggle of the government agent in the book, Lauren Glass, to communicate with the captive gray Adam is my struggle to communicate with the grays as I lived it. And once we're better at communicating, these stories that you hear will seem equally strange to what you are hearing, but there will be a consistency to them in the sense
Right.
that not that everyone will be describing the same thing, but we'll all understand what the heck they mean when somebody says, well, a gray came out of so-and-so.
Right. Okay. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Whitley, Strieber, and Art Bell. Good morning.
Encounters among the population are at random, or are they selected somehow?
They're not at random. I would not say that they were at random at all. I don't have that impression. And I have some rather surprising things to say about that. We made a list of all of the people who had written us letter mails, who had given us return addresses and names. It was quite a long list. And we had, not everyone who had written, but everyone who had written with describing an experience. And to our surprise, many, many of these names appeared to be Scots or Irish names, people from the Celtic countries, in other words. And, of course, the fairy lore, which is not, there's nothing to do with Tinkerbell, it's a lot more intense than that, comes from those countries as well. And if you read that lore, you find a lot in it, as Jacques Vallée, the great UFO researcher, did, that is similar to the modern close encounter experience. And you also find in the experience that it moves down generations. If one member of a family has it, almost, or quite often, older members of that same family will have it too. And sometimes I've had once a family showed up with 4 generations in tow: a baby, the young mother, the grandmother, and the great-grandmother, all who had had close encounter experiences dating back to the 30s. So it follows families, and it seems to have a Celtic orientation. There are a certain number of American Indians in that as well. The other thing is this. When you get a group of these people together, and I've been in many groups of them, there's a mildness to them, almost as if they've been chosen because they're not aggressive people. They're very mild people. They don't raise their fists to anybody. And it's like they're looking for certain types of people, and there's definitely some kind of process going on with regard to choosing them. It's not random.
All right. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Whitley. Hi.
Well, the answer to the first question is I've never seen personally anything like that. There are so many descriptions of different forms in the letters I've received, though, that there may be one or two with that form in it. It's not one I ever remember reading about either. Mm-hmm. And it's always possible, these things, you can see things that are, you can have a brief hallucination, or something can look like something that it actually isn't. And that may be all that it was. And there also, in terms of the close encounter experience, there are hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, where as you fall asleep, you may become paralyzed and you see a bizarre being or some equally strange hallucination, and people will sometimes weave that into a close encounter experience, or same thing can occasionally happen upon awakening. And those are commonplace, ordinary parts of life. They don't signify anything particularly serious. In general, I tend to kind of, in my own life, dismiss these things if they are not accompanied by some pretty definite physical evidence at the moment. In other words, if the creature had come into the house, then yeah, you could definitely say it was real. Or if you had seen a face, that it was not just a moment's hallucination or a little bit of a moment of sleep or something like that. But in this case, I think you just have to leave it in question.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see about getting myself hypnotically regressed back then to see if I can get a more clear picture.
Well, that also is a very good question. Whitley, how useful is hypnotic regression, in your opinion, for this sort of thing?
It depends on two things. First, if you don't have any real memories, then the chances of your weaving a memory out of your culture, out of your knowledge and your expectations are very high, whether the hypnotist is leading or not. So that's real hard. When I went under hypnosis, by the time I was hypnotized, I had everything I ever talked about under hypnosis. I remembered pretty much of the close encounter experience. The initial hypnosis session was very surprising because it involved things that had happened the previous autumn in October that I had not consciously remembered. But then when we got to the things that I did consciously remember, the hypnosis didn't add anything to it except detail. And it was also performed by a leading forensic hypnotist, a real professional, a specialist in that very thing of extracting evidence using hypnosis, and who had successful case solution in his career. In other words, he'd helped people solve crimes doing this. So his techniques were effective in drawing not the expectations or desires of the subject, but the actual memories of the subject, and that was proved in trial. So it's a very mixed bag. I would not necessarily try hypnosis under the circumstances that you describe. What I might try, though, is to let yourself to try to get into a relaxed situation and just see if you don't remember a little bit more. And don't push it at all, and maybe you will. If this is frightening and troubling to you and has left you, and it sort of sounds like this might be true in your voice, with a kind of an undercurrent of fear, it might be good to go to a psychologist, and not for hypnosis at all, but just to talk about it. Just somebody who will listen to you, and it doesn't matter what they think happened or didn't happen to you. You can just talk about it. And as you talk about it, this may help you to get a little bit more closure on it.
All right. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Whitley, Strieber, and Art Bell. Hi.
Well, if we're dealing with a situation where there is something happening that's really complex and extremely strange that is trying to throw us off because it wants to remain in the world of dream and conjecture. The result is that people are coming back with stories like this that are very hard to understand. And yet, there is one part about this story that's extremely familiar to me, and that is the process of a person being out at night in a situation when they are alone and suddenly finding themselves in this state. Is it a state that he's in? I mean, did he fall asleep, and did you fall asleep and then somehow go into a kind of a hypnagogic state like we were just describing? Or were you really taken somewhere? We don't yet know the answer to that question. My guess is that many people who have these experiences are being taken somewhere. I think they probably are. And they're coming back with descriptions of what happened to them that are very hard to understand because our language was not built to describe these experiences because they weren't part of our world, apparently. Or at least they certainly weren't something that we were trying to talk about to each other.
It's almost like the varied aspects of the descriptions we're getting are it's almost like they're meant to confuse, and they do a pretty good job of it, Whitley, but it's obvious, it's so obvious that this is real. This whole phenomena is absolutely real. It's really happening. But when you get these folks together and listen to story after story after story, it just kind of sounds crazy because it's all so different. Listen, buddy, we're out of time. It's been so great having you on the air. You don't need help with... Yeah, you don't need help with the graves. It's going to sell like crazy. And so your website, do you want to give that a quick plug?
Yeah, the website's unknowncountry.com, and go in the store, get the graves, take a look at it, and tell your friends about it. There's no reason not to anymore. People accept this now. It's fine to tell them about it.
It's already happening. Buddy, thank you for being on the program, and good night.
Welcome. You can call me Radix, the ultra neutral, the one from 72. Doing more and more research and more digging, it now is more apparent to me that we are in a natural reality dealing with an alien species that has hacked time. And because of that, they have left a huge piece of evidence, which is the year 1972, and how that year actually connects to the year 2020, and how I am the only person in the world that is educating people and bringing the message and was able to predict the election in 2020 through great detail, as well as other predictions that also came true that have to do with looking at the year 1972 and the time hack and how it affected the year 2020 and will lead us into civil war as well as a galactic war that is clearly upon all of us that is coming down. And you'll see that evidence by coming here and looking at the evidence that I present. I'm also going to be teaching you things about how flying saucers work, things about different alien species like the reptilians, the Anunnaki, and about the Greys, because I myself had a reptilian experience where my mind was unlocked, and that is one of the great reasons why I'm able to present all of this knowledge, because up until the year 2017, when my mind was unlocked, not long after that, I was starting to able to see the holes in the reality, see all the connections of the things that were going on that led to a time hack, which tells us learn from them and push forward as humanity, and not to suppress one another and suppress our own species. So if you're ready to have your mind unlocked, if you're ready to receive the message that nobody else in the world is talking about, if you're ready to see the truth, if you're ready to understand and look at the evidence, then welcome to Rat X Files.